Elijah and Elias Moore, also known as Smoke and Stack, or collectively as the Twins, were likely born sometime around 1895, give or take a year, based on their appearance in 1932. The brothers were born in Clarksdale, Mississippi, the birthplace of blues music, to parents whose names we don't know. Their entrance to the world was a difficult one, after Stack became stuck during delivery. But a local woman attending the birth managed to save both of the twins. Soon after, Smoke and Stack's mother died. It's unclear what age the twins were when this happened, but we do know the woman who had delivered them then nursed them in place of their real mother.
And after she died, my mama nursed them like they was her own.
There's not much known about what Smoke and Stack did for the first few years of their life, but we can assume that they, like many of the poorer families in Clarksdale, worked the cotton fields. Some children began working the fields as young as 5 years old, and if their father also worked in the cotton fields, it's likely the twins began as young as possible. While Smoke and Stack were raised near an uncle and aunt, they ultimately lived under the roof of their father, a violent man whose cruelty was often directed at the twins, Stack in particular. Seems like a backstory we encounter all too often here on Horror History. One day, in a fit of rage, their father hit Stack so hard it knocked him unconscious. Smoke, unable to bear it any longer, killed their father in retaliation. And he was already half done burying the body as Stack regained consciousness. This moment in their childhood is a window into the twins' dynamic. Smoke is the dominant twin. He's the protector, fiercely loyal, and quick to act when people he loves are threatened. He responds with violence as a survival instinct, a trait likely inherited from his father. Stack, on the other hand, is more emotionally complex. Despite being the one who is usually hurt, he downplays the abuse.
He ain't mean it.
These differences in their characteristics would remain and define how each twin navigated situations in the future. After Mr. Moore's death, the twins were taken in by the same woman who had delivered them and nursed them as infants. Though her name is never revealed, we do learn that her father was half black and had raised her to protect her from the Ku Klux Klan. She must have taken a liking to raising kids because around 1904, she had a daughter of her own and named her Mary. At some point in his adulthood, Smoke met Annie, a local woman who practiced hoodoo, a kind of spiritual African folk magic, and the pair struck up a romance. But when the USA joined World War I in April 1917, the relationship would be put on pause when Smoke and Stack were drafted into the army. The twins would have been around 22 when they were drafted. Before they left, Annie made a mojo bag for Smoke to keep him safe overseas. A mojo bag in the practice of hoodoo is usually a small, hand-sewn pouch filled with items like herbs, coins, roots, or personal objects to bring protection, healing, or harm. While preparing the mojo bag, Annie recites a prayer: soil of my soil, bone of my bone, blood of my blood, I bless you, Ashe. Through the prayer, Annie invokes the ancestors to protect Smoke. The word Ashe is a Yoruba term, meaning power, command, or so be it. By saying the word, she activates the spell. Smoke and Stack survived the war, likely returning home in late 1918 or early 1919. Sometime between 1919 and 1925, Smoke and Annie had a baby daughter, but she died within months, and the couple buried her on the grounds of Annie's shack. Having seen more of the world and having survived the brutality of war, the twins craved more from life. They wanted money. They wanted freedom. In 1924, at 29 years old, they began a string of bank heists across their town and in neighboring counties, culminating in the robbery of the First National Bank on February 8th. Their method was simple but effective. Stack's smooth talk kept the staff compliant, while Smoke's force kept the room under control. By 1925, with their pockets full, the brothers left Mississippi for Chicago to start a new life. We know they left that year because in 1932, Stack says that they'd been gone for 7 years.
7 years ain't long enough to forget about us.
Before they left, they paid a visit to their younger cousin, Sammie Moore, and gave him a guitar once belonging to their father. Interestingly, this small act of kindness would set in motion a chain of events that would lead to a fateful night in 1932 that would change all of their lives forever. If you want to better understand the critical difference between the Smokestack Twins, the metaphor for cultural appropriation and sinners, the importance of every vampire song, and all of the hidden canon information in the film's official Spotify page, then stick around to the end of this video. Welcome to Horror History. The Smokestack Twins are the two main protagonists of the 2025 vampire action horror movie Sinners. According to Ryan Coogler, the writer, director, and producer of the film, Sinners is a love letter to everything he loves about cinema and to the uncle that introduced him to and shared his love of blues music. The idea for this story came to him while listening to the classic blues song Wang Dang Doodle, written by Willie Dixon and recorded by Howlin' Wolf in 1960. Interestingly, Howlin' Wolf also recorded a song called Smokestack Lightning, perhaps an influence in the naming of our protagonists, who you are watching the video about right now. According to Dixon, Wang Dang Doodle meant a party or night out in the town with plenty of music, dancing, and whooping it up. Urban Dictionary describes it as a good old-fashioned Saturday night filled with drunken revelry, which may include but is not limited to fighting, dancing, singing, and the like. Which is not a bad logline for Sinners. The song itself was used within the film, a dark foreshadowing of what was to come. Sometime between 1925 and 1931, Smoke and Stack began working for Al Capone, the famous businessman and gangster who rose to power during Prohibition and founded the Chicago Mafia. Mafia. We know it happened within that window because Capone was arrested for tax evasion in 1931. As someone who was Chicago raised, I never knew they ended up getting him on tax evasion of all things. That would be like if Jason Voorhees was arrested for jaywalking. His arrest left a power vacuum in Chicago's underworld. Tensions rose as rival families scrambled for control. The twins, tired of the chaos, decided it was time to return home and deal with the devil they knew. Before they left, they made one last move to secure their finances. Taking advantage of the brewing conflict, they stole 500 bottles of beer from the Irish Mafia and crates of wine from the Italians, letting each side believe that the other was to blame. The resulting fallout made the papers on October 5th, 1932, placing the thefts in late September or early October. With the money, liquor, and a plan, the twins slipped quietly back into their hometown of Clarksdale. They dreamed of power, of ownership, and most of all, of freedom. They wanted to build their own business, so they set their sights on the old sawmill.
Our own juke joint. For us and by us.
Blues music plays an important part within Sinners, being as much of a character as the humans and the vampires.
Blues music has a very important relationship with global pop culture, with American pop culture, and with black culture specifically, because it came out of that culture. And in this time, it's a lot of shame and pain and discomfort associated with the time. I was very interested in that irony of people dealing with such intense oppression and such intense difficulty of life, but still somehow maintaining the zest for life.
The music used by Coogler in Sinners is rich with hidden meaning. Every song choice reveals something deeper about the characters and the story. But the hidden messages don't stop there. As part of Sinners marketing, Coogler and his team embedded additional lore into the movie's official Spotify soundtrack. Tucked away in the About section is a carousel of images, some taken directly from the film's opening sequence, others presented as in-universe newspaper clippings that reveal key pieces of character backstories. While it's true that we do already have a horror movie as a metaphor for racial segregation in Candyman, I feel that Sinners does a good job of differentiating itself, because it focuses more on the separation of music and culture, whereas Candyman and its sequels are more of a commentary on segregation's impact on romantic relationships. Blues music, like horror, is a form of storytelling rooted in pain, trauma, and injustice. The blues were born out of the trauma of slavery and the enduring oppression in the southern United States. Its roots can be traced back to about 1890. The movement began as vocal music and work songs, musical traditions developed by enslaved African Americans to cope with the forced labor and suffering. But over time, blues became a distinct and celebrated genre that gave a voice to the victims of injustice. Where blues channels sorrow into rhythm and melody, giving a voice to the voiceless, horror does something similar by transforming fear into metaphor. As many viewers of my channel already know, horror often uses monsters to confront things that society prefers to look away from. Both are rebellious at their core, unafraid to speak uncomfortable truths. And I'm not the only one who sees the connection.
If blues is the backbone for popular music globally, the scary story is the backbone for all storytelling.
I've talked before in horror history about cultural legendizing, when a community's collective trauma transforms into myth or legend, carrying the emotional truth forward in a symbolic form. From Godzilla as a metaphor for nuclear fallout, to the Demogorgon being a manifestation of the fears of communism. In Sinners, a similar process plays out, but we see it not just in the vampires, but in the music that underscores all of it. The time setting is important here. In 1932, America was in the thick of the Great Depression. The stock market crash of 1929 had sent the country into a downward spiral, with unemployment hitting record highs and entire families struggling to just put food on the table. The wounds from World War I hadn't fully healed. Though the fighting had ended over a decade earlier, its many veterans came home and found it difficult to pick up with their lives. While the government provided some financial resources, many faced challenges such as public neglect, mental health issues, and economic hardships. Prohibition was also still in effect, which was a nationwide ban on the production, sale, and transportation of alcohol in the US from 1920 to 1933. It was intended to curb crime and improve public morals. Instead, it fueled the rise of organized crime, underground speakeasies, bootlegging, and widespread lawbreaking. All the while, life in the American South was especially harsh for black communities thanks to Jim Crow laws. Introduced in the late 1800s, they enforced strict racial segregation in public spaces and institutionalized white supremacy at every level of society. These laws denied black Americans the right to vote and withheld equal access to education and employment. By embedding racial hierarchy into the legal system, they also legitimized violence as a means of control. White supremacists, from mobs to local authorities, could harass, assault, or even kill black individuals with little fear of prosecution. population. Lynching became a common weapon of terror, and acts of brutality were often ignored or even supported by law enforcement. In the face of all of this craziness, juke joints became more than just nightlife spots. They were a retreat. Often built on the outskirts of town or tucked away behind homes, these gatherings offered a rare space for freedom and fun. After long days of labor, people would come together to drink, dance, share stories, and lose themselves in the rhythms of the blues. Juke joints gave them a place to reclaim their autonomy, if only for a night. That's why the twins, Smoke and Stack, decided that they were going to use their blood money to open a juke joint of their own. But to fully understand the dynamic of this gunslinging genome pair, we've first got to shake the dust off the broom and travel back to the transaction that started it all. In the early morning on October 15th, 1932, Smoke and Stack headed to the old sawmill to wait for Hogwood, the man they intended to buy the mill from and who has terrible timekeeping. We know it's the 15th because we see a title card for the following day, which is the 16th. Inside, the twins notice that the floor has recently been cleaned.
Y'all wash these floors?
Yeah. What was on them?
Hogwood is the leader of the local clan, and what the twins don't know is that selling the mill to them is nothing more than a twisted, well-worn scheme. He takes their money, waits until they settle in, then returns with his clan and kills everyone inside. When Hogwood challenges them about the mill, calling them boys, the twins react differently. Smoke gets defensive, while Stack plays it off coolly. They agree to the sale, paying in cash, but they make one thing clear. Hogwood is to never step foot on the property again, a request that would not be honored. Smoke and Stack head to their uncle's church to pick up their cousin, Sammie. The twins' uncle Jed isn't exactly a fan of their plans for the mill, believing them to be making a place for drunkards and cheats to shirk their responsibilities to their families. As the three head out to prepare for the opening night of their new music venue, Smoke asks Sammie if his father is treating him and his siblings right. With the memories of his own father's violence, he wants to make sure that history isn't repeating itself.
So you're not putting his hands on you, is he?
Sammie tells Smoke that his father treats him right, but while he may not put hands on them, he does try to enforce his strict religious beliefs on Sammie and expects him to give up the music that he loves and instead just play music for the church. But Sammie is hopeful about a future where he can be free to make his own decisions. He dreams of leaving the cotton fields and becoming a blues musician. He asks the twins about Chicago. Having heard that they don't enforce the Jim Crow laws there, he sees it as an opportunity for a black man to be whatever he wants. But Smoke has traveled and seen the world outside their town, so he's not as idealistic as his younger cousin is and tells him,
Chicago ain't shit from Mississippi with tall buildings instead of plantation.
I've never been to Mississippi, but I'm pretty sure they don't have anything that competes with Wrigley Field or Gene and Jude's. Gene and Jude's didn't quite exist yet, but you get my point. The trio drive out to retrieve a truck that the twins had hidden earlier in the undergrowth, packed with the stolen alcohol, which I imagine is very warm at that point, but I won't judge. But before they can get moving, they're startled by a venomous timber rattlesnake curled up in the vehicle. Smoke acts fast, removing the snake without hesitation. In another horror franchise, the snake might be read as a biblical symbol of temptation, but I think it more likely represents the hidden danger, a snake in the grass. Or in this case, a snake in the truck, which is in the grass. Silent until it strikes, the snake becomes a warning of what's coming, foreshadowing both the venomous vampires lurking in the story and the ever-present threat of the clan. It's a symbol of the game Smoke and Stack were playing, a game that was about to get a whole lot deadlier. With their plans delayed because of Hogwood's late arrival, the trio decides to split up. Smoke tells Sammie to go with Stack and keep an eye on him because he doesn't know how to watch his own back. This isn't the first time we've seen Smoke's protective nature. Despite their identical appearance, the Smokestack twins have noticeable differences in their personalities. Smoke, as the dominant twin, is more aggressive and more protective of those he cares about. He's the one who often takes charge, whether it's buying the mill, questioning his uncle's treatment of his cousins, or laying out the harsh truths of Chicago to Sammie. When Hogwood confronted them, Smoke reached for his gun, while Stack reached for his wallet. By contrast, Stack is much more playful. He's lighter in mood, more quick-witted, and more comfortable using charm or humor to diffuse tension. In many twin relationships, particularly among identical twins, it's common for one twin to take on a more dominant role. This dominance can show up in various forms: physically stronger, more verbally assertive, or taking the lead socially. While not a universal rule, studies have shown that twins often establish a kind of pecking order influenced by both biological and social factors. Physical size can play a role, especially in male twins, with the larger twin often assuming dominance. But it's not just about brawn. Personality, family dynamics, and even birth order can shape these roles over time. In cases where one twin experiences developmental delays and the other does not, research shows that parents and caregivers consistently perceive the typically developing twin as the more dominant one, a perception that can persist even after developmental issues are resolved. resolved. We know that Stack was the one who was targeted by their father. Perhaps he saw Stack as the weaker twin, an easier target. Smoke and Stack's dynamic also mirrors that of another infamous pair of crime twins, the Cray brothers. Ronnie and Reggie Cray were notorious gangsters in the 1950s and 60s, known for their brutal grip over the East End of London until their eventual arrest in 1968. Like Smoke and Stack, they shared a reputation for violence and loyalty, but also had clearly distinct personalities. Ronnie, like Smoke, was the more volatile and dominant twin, while Reggie, much like Stack, was smoother, more charismatic, and better at navigating social situations. This contrast between the twins isn't just shown through their personalities, it's woven into the fabric of the film through costume and color. Stack is consistently dressed in red, emphasizing his passionate, impulsive nature. Smoke, on the other hand, is dressed in blue, reflecting his colder, more restrained demeanor. The color theory extends beyond the twins, bleeding into Sinner's broader color palette, a deliberate choice by Ryan Coogler, rooted in red, white, and blue. A subtle but constant reminder that this is an American story, America. Smoke heads into town, looking for someone to watch the truck while he sorts out some business, and offers a trustworthy looking girl 10 cents for every minute he's gone, which would be $2.16 per minute today, or $130 an hour, which is pretty good considering that cash transport guards make closer to $27 per hour in 2025. But I guess Smoke knew this would be a quick job. Despite the girl being visibly happy with the offer, Smoke tells her she shouldn't accept it.
See, we talking numbers now, and numbers always gotta be in conversation with each other. You understand? You gotta negotiate.
This is the first time we see the twins use negotiation tactics in hiring someone to do something for them. Usually in negotiation, you try to talk the price down, but I think the point is that he's giving back to his community by teaching her. But the twins' other negotiations would not be so benign. In a time when black men had very little say in anything under Jim Crow, negotiating, whether for money, space, or safety, was almost an act of rebellion. Most didn't have the privilege of negotiating, so the fact that Smoke and Stack do shows their rare position of power. For them, money isn't just about greed and survival, it's about leverage, a tool for carving autonomy in a world designed to deny them both. But their attitudes towards money are as different as their personalities. Smoke sees it as a means of control and power, a way to keep danger at bay. His negotiations are measured and strategic. Stack, on the other hand, sees the potential to build a fortune. His deals are still strategic, but he also has a willingness to adapt. Anyway, the reason Smoke needs someone to look after his car is so that he can pay a visit to Bo Chow at the Chow's grocery store, looking to hire him and his wife Grace to provide food for the opening night of their Juke joint and to create the club's entrance sign, which seems like it's way too short notice for something that big, but maybe that's the hours I've spent grinding away at making YouTube thumbnails talking. We once again see Smoke negotiate on price, dropping it down when he discovers that they only have one color for the sign, red. Perhaps he didn't like that it wasn't his signature color. Their business is interrupted by two thieves attempting to rob Smoke's truck. The girl Smoke hired earns her pay and alerts him to the theft, which he quickly deals with.
Can't have some talking about how he almost robbed the twins.
Meanwhile, Stack and Sammie head to the Clarksdale train station in search of Delta Sim, a local blues player. Stack offers Slim $20, or about $430 in 2025 money, to play at the Juke's opening night. Slim initially refuses the offer, worried that he'd lose his stable Saturday night slot at a local bar named Messengers. While he's only paid in corn liquor, Slim believes that's all a sinner like him can ask for. But like his brother, Stack is a master negotiator, and he pulls out a bottle of Irish beer he'd taken from the truck earlier, which catches Slim's attention. Knowing he's gotten Slim interested, he offers him $40 a night and all the beer he can drink, to which Slim readily agrees. Like their personalities, the twins' negotiating styles are distinct. Smoke operates as if there's a strict code of etiquette to follow, while Stack reads his opponent in search of a weakness, so smoothly they hardly realize they're being maneuvered. At the train station, Sammie meets Perline, a local woman, and invites her to join the Juke joint's opening night. Meanwhile, Stack is approached by Mary, furious to see him back in town. She reminds him of the last time she saw him, when he slipped out of her bed without saying goodbye the night before he left for Chicago. She's angrier still that the twins didn't show up for her mother's funeral the day before. She accuses the twins of only loving her mother as long as they could get something out of her. Stack brushes off Mary's anger with his usual calm exterior. While the twins often operate from self-interest, it doesn't mean that their affection isn't real. Stack knew that Mary's lighter skin meant that she could pass as white, and believed he could get her a rich white husband and a life far from the dangers of Jim Crow laws. So he pushed her away, thinking he was protecting her. As Stack, Sammie, and Slim drive past a group of black prisoners breaking rocks along the roadside, Slim recalls a story he'd been told years earlier about a friend who was falsely accused of theft and assault, then beaten to death by a white mob. When he finishes, Slim shifts from recounting this brutality to quietly humming a blues melody, a direct illustration of how the blues became a way to process and survive that pain. The trio arrive at a cotton field and hire another friend, Cornbread, to work as the bouncer at their club. Interestingly, this is the only time the twins don't negotiate. Stack simply says he's gonna pay him a lot of money, which is the only convincing Cornbread needs. Meanwhile, across town, Smoke drives to Annie's shack to lay flowers at their baby's grave. When he notices Annie accepting counterfeit money from 2 young girls, he offers her real cash, but Annie tells him she doesn't want his money.
Your money come with blood.
All money come with blood, baby.
Smoke's reply is flippant, but it carries a brutal kind of truth. In a world built on exploitation and violence, there's no such thing as clean money. And for Smoke, who's seen the battlefield and Chicago's underworld, the only thing he's come to believe in is power. Money is just a tool that buys you power. Annie, rooted in her hoodoo practices, sees things differently. She tells him that despite his own unwillingness to believe in magic, it wasn't money that kept him safe all of those years. It was her mojo bank. But as they argue, someone was being chased into town that would threaten not only their safety, but everything they'd ever known. Remmick, a vampire of Irish origin, arrived at the home of a local couple, Joan and Bert. Charismatic and manipulative, he uses charm and gold to win their trust and, more importantly, entry to their home. Once inside, Remmick reveals his true nature, feeding on them both and turning them into vampires. Thanks to the supplemental info hidden on the Spotify soundtrack, we know that Remmick arrived in America on August 1st, 1911. Remmick sailed to his new home aboard the Celtic Hare. The ship's wreckage was discovered in the early morning, and while the decks were soaked in blood, no bodies were found. One witness said that she saw a lone man fleeing the scene, his skin smoldering. This is basically the story of Dracula, who journeyed to England aboard the Demeter and was witnessed running up the stairs to the church in the form of a black dog. Vampires love a murderous boat ride to a new country. Wreck 4 Apocalypse is another creepy undead boat ride if you are looking for more examples. But Sinners has to be one of the freshest feeling vampire movies as of late. There's no obligatory waiting period to slow down the plot. Once a person is fed on, they're almost instantly turned. Also, can we just talk about the fact that there's clearly a baby's crib in the background? I'm beginning to think this Remmick guy is not such a good guy. But one of my favorite features of Coogler's vampires has to be the glowing eyes. The vampire's eyes have the same quality some animals have called tapetum lucidum. It's a reflective layer in the eyes of nocturnal animals, allowing them to see in low light, but also giving off that glowing appearance. A subtle explanation for the uncanny ability these creatures have to see in dark wooded areas. While Stack, Smoke, Sammie, and everyone they hired head to the sawmill to set up the Juke joint, Remmick gets to work fleshing out his own vampiric clan. After a long day of work, people from town and people who worked in the cotton fields all day come to the club to drink, gamble, and dance their troubles away. The twins want the opening night to be a financial success, but as we've seen, they often take different approaches to things, especially money. Smoke seems to be taking the Dave Ramsey approach, only wanting to accept hard cash.
This ain't no house party, and it damn sure ain't no charity.
Stack is willing to allow patrons to pay in tokens that they earned working in the fields.
See, these niggas been working in the field all day. When they show up here, let them enjoy themselves.
I would typically be in Smoke's corner here. I think it's stupid to buy things that you don't have the money for, but to be fair to Stack, the cotton field tokens are probably not as predatory as the credit card companies of today. Though I wasn't there in Jim Crow time, so I could be wrong. I'm not trying to get into that rant today though. This video is all about the blues, as Mary found out when she arrived at the club. She's initially met with suspicion and hostility though. Cornbread blocks her at the door, assuming that she's white. Once inside, Smoke tells Stack to take care of her, or he will. It's another example of Smoke being protective, this time of the club and the people inside it, while Stack is more open to embracing outside influence. It's a battle of ideals, and a microcosm of the wider cultural battle, with Smoke representing those who want to preserve the culture cultivated by the suffering of their people. He even tries to pay Mary to leave, which she refuses. But it's Stack's openness that eventually leads to his downfall. Sammie later performs a song that he wrote for his father. The song expresses his love of the blues in spite of his father wanting him to turn away from it and towards the church. If I had a nickel for every time I covered a character who is pushed into an art considered sinful by a controlling father who works in the church, I'd have 2 nickels, which, as I mentioned, is worth a lot in 1932, but it's still weird that it happened twice. But Sammie's song, like most of the blues, is a form of rebellion against his dad, and there's a narrative parallel here. Sammie's father forces the church on him, as the English tried to impose their religion on Remmick and his people. You have a juxtaposition between religion and the blues. Religion is forced, while the blues was chosen.
Blues wasn't forced on us like that religion. No, sir. We brought this with us from home. It's magic what we do.
Sammie's performance creates a surreal scene where past and future are linked through the power of music. There are legends and myths throughout history and different cultures that speak of people born with the gift of making music so true that it can pierce the veil between life and death, conjuring spirits from the past and the future. While it's taken very literally in this movie, I see this concept as a visual representation of how music can be a vessel for history and culture, and truly great music will stand the test of time and pass these stories on to future generations. In medieval Ireland, they had fillies, highly highly trained poets and scholars. In West Africa, they had griots, who were oral storytellers, poets, and musicians. In Celtic Britain, England, Scotland, and Ireland, they had bards, musicians and storytellers who preserved heroic tales. And now we have System of a Down, a metal band passing on their Armenian heritage while crafting their own tales of political defiance. You can check out their story over on my other channel, Pumpkin Metal. And sure, I brought that up because I will take any excuse to talk about System, but when you think about it, Holy Mountains or Aerials are not that different from what was going on inside of Club Juke, from a cultural standpoint. And while the people dancing inside Club Juke aren't aware of the veil of time being broken around them, it draws the attention of someone else. The twins are called away from managing their party by their bouncer Cornbread when a trio of white visitors, Remmick, Joan, and Bert, approach the club and try to gain entrance. The three vampires in disguise insist that they just want to drink, spend some money, play some music, and have a good time. Trying to prove that they belong, the vampires perform a rendition of Pick Poor Robin Clean, one of the earliest blues songs ever recorded. This song choice isn't random, it's packed with hidden meaning. The lyrics tell a story of hunger and survival, reflecting the time of severe economic hardship during the Great Depression. It's about feeding on and utterly consuming something, which is exactly what Remmick, controlled by his vampiric urges, intends to do to everyone in the club. Pick Poor Robin Clean was originally recorded by bluesman Luke Jordan in 1927, but a more famous rendition was released by Geechee Wiley and Elvie Thomas in 1931. This is a song Remmick has appropriated from black blues singers, which he now tries to use for his own gain, much like he hopes to do with Sammie's music. Sammie's gift carries the ability to bridge the past and future, and Remmick, cut off from his own people, sees it as a way to free himself from his curse. But while the original carries the soul of Delta blues, the vampire's performance has a more folksy quality. It sounds like blues on the surface, but it lacks the lived experience and depth that give the blues its power. In that way, their rendition is the perfect metaphor for shallow cultural appropriation, mimicking the sound without truly knowing its meaning. In spite of Stack enjoying the performance, the twins turn the vampires away, stating that this is a juke joint that plays blues music, which is an interesting thing to say considering it is technically a blues song. It's a revealing line that shows the music isn't the issue. Ultimately, they're turned away because they're white. Club Juke acts as a symbol of cultural segregation. The door is a very clear boundary between those allowed and those excluded, and Cornbread, as the bouncer, decides who to let in. But unlike the historical reality, this is selective segregation on black terms. Club Juke protects black culture, black art, and the community from outsiders and exploiters. Remmick and his vampires are literally and symbolically uninvited. Like traditional vampire lore, they can't come in unless welcomed. But once again, Stack is more open to outside influence and more willing to integrate.
What if they just came to sing?
He's open to their presence and their customs, but Smoke immediately shuts the idea down, concerned for the safety of everyone inside if something went wrong. Later, Smoke has a private talk with Sammie where his dominant and protective nature comes through once more. He tells Sammie that being a musician is no life. He urges him to stick to church music or walk away from it altogether. Smoke wants something better for Sammie, a safer, cleaner life, one far removed from the dangers that shaped the twins. But Sammie has heard this before, from his own father, and like many teenagers, he's tired of being told what to do. That day had only solidified his passion for the blues. Like many people that night, Sammie goes through a transformation. He decides that he's not giving up his music. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to Smoke, Stack and Mary quietly try to solve the club's financial problems by sending Mary out into the dark to check on the pale strangers, not knowing just how venomous these outsiders could be. Mary finds Remmick and his new recruits outside the club singing an Irish and Scottish folk song called Wild Mountain Time. The song, as we know it, was first recorded in 1957, but existed under the name The Braes of Balquidder, an older Scottish ballad recorded in 1914 that inspired the later version. The song is about a man inviting a young woman to join him in gathering wildflowers. Again, this foreshadows Remmick inviting Mary to join him and the vampires. The hypnotic melody almost acts like a lullaby, enticing Mary in. Before she can return to Club Juke, Remmick attacks and turns her. And with Mary's attack, Remmick is able to infiltrate the club. She becomes the vessel through which everyone else is eventually corrupted.
We gonna kill every last one of you.
As someone who moves between both the black and white communities, Mary is the perfect Trojan horse. Through her, Remmick's influence slips past the boundaries that had protected the club, which also represents his ill-intentioned infiltration into black culture. The next victim is Cornbread, who's ambushed outside while taking a leak in the woods. And while Smoke is preoccupied dealing with a gambling dispute, Stack Stack is seduced by Mary, attacked, and turned, giving an entirely new meaning to the term "she's for the streets." At first, Annie believes that they're dealing with a haint, a term in Southern folklore for a restless ghost or evil spirit known for trickery or malice. But after a violent encounter with the now transformed Cornbread and Stack rising back up after having certainly been dead, Annie realizes that they're dealing with vampires. And these vamps follow most of the classic vampire rules. According to Annie, the best way to fight back is with garlic, wooden stakes, holy water, and silver. While silver is traditionally associated with werewolves, it has appeared in certain vampire adaptations including Blade, The Witcher, and the Hammer horror film starring Christopher Lee. I already went into this in my Wolfman episode, so I'll keep it brief, but silver is seen as one of the purest metals, as opposed to ores like iron or copper, which need to be refined. And since many classic monsters like vampires and werewolves were created as part of metaphors about religious impurity, it would make sense that silver would be a weakness. It is also shiny and looks pretty cool. As the survivors inside prepare for battle, Remmick and his growing number of vamp brethren begin to sing and dance outside. This time, they perform The Rocky Road to Dublin, an Irish folk song first recorded in 1859. The song follows the journey of an Irishman chronicling the hardships and violence they encountered along the way. Perhaps the lyrics reflect Remmick's own hardships and journey, but for the purposes of this video, it's important to note the tune's context in 1850s Ireland. While not directly about the famine, it emerges from a period shortly after the Great Famine, during which many Irish families were forced to emigrate to England, America, and elsewhere. The very song chronicles the spread of Irish culture, something that Smoke is very resistant to. This idea is reflected outside Club Juke, where Remmick's group has swelled in number. He assimilates everyone: black, white, Irish, Chinese, and American. I don't think anything says cultural assimilation louder than Cornbread's dance moves during this sequence. No matter where he is, my eye just immediately goes to him getting down with it. He's kinda legendary for that though, I can't lie. Remmick's quote-unquote clan is literally a mixture of races, genders, and cultures, including Bo Chow, who after turning, tries to persuade his wife and the others to let the vampires in.
You should listen to him, Grace, or listen to me. Cause I know everything he knows now.
Becoming a vampire is a literal form of assimilation, a complete absorption into another culture. The vampires function as a hive mind, all mentally connected in some way. As a result, when Remmick turns someone, he gains their memories, skill, and knowledge. Like when he speaks Chinese after turning Bo. It's the vampire movie equivalent of language convergence, when languages become more similar over time, like how in English we now use words like fiesta from Spanish, karate from Japanese, or even how people use words like ratioed from Twitter in actual spoken conversations. If you find yourself doing this, seek immediate help. But this connection works both ways. The others have Remmick's memories and feel his pain too. But more than anything, the one Remmick wants is not Smoke or Stack, but Sammie.
You're the one I came for.
Remmick longs to see his people again, but is unable to because he's trapped, cursed to live as a vampire forever.
The soul gets stuck in the body. Can't rejoin the ancestors. Cursed to live here with all this hate.
To Remmick, Sammie's music represents a way out. Sammie's gift is so powerful it can bridge the barrier between the past and future. Remmick believes that by turning Sammie and assimilating his gift for himself, he can tear down that barrier and finally reach his people again. But he doesn't understand the pain or cultural weights behind the music. He just wants its power. So he makes the group an offer. They give him Sammie and he lets them walk away with their lives. But the survivors refuse.
He belongs to us. He belongs with us.
Smoke tells Remmick he ain't gonna let it happen. His protective instinct could be seen as a defense of the culture and community that the club represents. Keeping Sammie isn't just about keeping him safe, it's about refusing to let their music and their identity be claimed by outsiders. The metaphor continues when Stack, now turned into a vampire and aligning with Remmick, tries to persuade Smoke to join him. He argues that becoming a vampire is the only way to truly be free, making reference to the earlier conversations about how Jim Crow laws have limited their true freedom, even after the abolition of slavery. He may be free now, but freedom means nothing if he can't share it with his brother. But Smoke, ever set in his ways, as always, refuses, and the group retreats into the club, shaken and scared by Remmick's revelations. However, their temporary shell of safety would be shattered when Grace, looking to protect her daughter who is a sitting duck at home with no knowledge of the vampire outbreak, basically crashes out and shouts an invite to the fanged foes surrounding the mill. A bloody fight breaks out with Grace and Annie among the casualties. Slim sacrifices himself so Perline, Sammie, and Smoke can escape, but Remmick intercepts them, turning Perline and chasing Sammie outside. This ultimately leaves Smoke to battle with Stack, but Smoke just can't bring himself to kill his twin, so he strikes a deal. Stack can walk away, but only if he lets Sammie live out the rest of his days in peace. Meanwhile, Sammie attacks Remmick with his guitar, injuring him and in turn hurting the other vampires. And I love that Sammie uses his guitar, his tool of music, to attack him. It's one more symbolic metaphor for the blues, and their ability to give a voice to the oppressed. The very thing Remmick wanted to exploit is flipped and used as a weapon. Between Sammie's attack, Smoke driving a wooden stake through him, and the sunrise, Remmick is killed alongside the other vampires. Remmick was always performing, portraying himself as something that he wasn't. His human face is just a mask, a carefully constructed illusion of civility and unity. But as events unfold, that mask begins to slip. Bit by bit, his true nature bleeds through, until there's nothing left to hide behind. In the end, what we see is what he truly is, the monster that he's always been. Having survived the night, Smoke and Sammie part ways. Smoke tells his little cousin to be strong, something that he's always tried to be. Sammie returns to his family before leaving for a new life, but the fight isn't over quite yet. When Hogwood and 13 Klansmen arrive to kill the twins and anyone in the club, they find it empty. Smoke, hidden in the bushes outside, launches a surprise attack. Drawing on his wartime experience and time on the streets of Chicago working for Capone, he single-handedly outguns them in an epic shootout, killing each of them. But the victory comes at a cost. Smoke is mortally wounded in the fight and reunites with Annie and their late daughter in the afterlife. Everyone there that night went through a transformation. Stack, Mary, Cornbread, Bo, and Perline all became vampires. Grace and Annie died, and Sammie decided what he wanted from his life, instead of being told by others. At the end, we see Smoke's final transition has come full circle in the way he handles his last negotiation. When Hogwood offers him money in a last-ditch effort to save his own life, he ignores it. Before this, every negotiation was rooted in the belief that money meant power and freedom. This is the first negotiation that he refuses outright, because he's no longer bargaining for survival or control. Over the next 6 decades, Stack and Mary navigated through the changing world together, only surfacing at night, never aging, and of course, never losing their love for music. While we don't know much about what they did during that time, we do know that they always kept track of Sammie's career, buying every single one of his records. In 1992, Sammie had lived a long life as a successful blues musician who owns a bar called Perline's, named in honor of his love from 1932. One night, after playing a set, he's visited by Stack and Mary, who, to his surprise, had survived that violent night at Club Juke. Or at least survived as vampires. I don't really know if that's typically considered survival. Stack had kept his promise to Smoke. He had let Sammie live out his days in peace. But aware that Sammie, as a mortal human, doesn't have very much time left, Stack offers to turn him. However, Sammie says that he's seen enough of life. He's done. Stack informs his cousin that they'd been following his career, but showing some of his brother's purest tendencies, says that he isn't a fan of the modern electric music that Sammie makes. He prefers the old, or the real as he calls it. Stack asks Sammie if he would play some of that real music for him, one last time. Performing Travelin', just as he had 60 years earlier, brings Stack back to that day in 1932. In the end, all 3 survivors, vampire or not, remain deeply human. They grieve, they carry pain, and they each long for some kind of peace. Despite the decades and transformations, they've managed to adapt to a new world and culture, all while preserving their own history and identity. After everything that happened, Stack and Sammie are able to get along. They're still family that love each other. When the Juke joint had its 1 day of operation, the vampires had come not just to feed, but to consume and steal memories, abilities, and cultures. Remmick's offer promised friendship and unity, but like many colonizers before him, he wanted to take without understanding. To strip the music of its pain, history, and meaning to use it for his own personal gain. Remmick wanted Sammie's songs and stories, but it wasn't going to be taken without resistance. Perhaps the ending suggests that assimilation is inevitable and not inherently wrong, but what matters is how it happens. Remmick approached it with selfish intention, so his attempt was destructive and didn't preserve what made the blues special. Sammie and Stack, on the other hand, survived by adapting to the times and integrating elements of the new culture into their lives. Sammie's music evolved from the raw blues of his youth, or the real blues as Stack called it, to include the modern electronic sound, showing that change can preserve history while still embracing the future. Smoke and Stack's story teaches an important lesson about understanding and respecting cultures, which can also be applied to other cultures and time periods, such as the YouTube horror deep dive community. So make sure you subscribe to CZsWorld for new horrors every week, otherwise you're an evil and racist freak. And make sure you check out my other channel, Pumpkin Metal, if you're into pop punk and metal band history, and I will see you in the next one, assuming we both survive.